comfortable, feel free to turn on your cameras on. Otherwise, you can continue and enjoy your dinner or whatever you should be doing at the same time as listening to this.
Yeah, it's true.
I keep mine off because I'm working at the same time, but I'm trying to listen out of this ear as well.
Great, wonderful. Thanks, Michael. I really should have thought about putting music on in the background or something.
I was just thinking that.
You can dance, Aline.
Oh,
Play your guitar.
No, I'm okay. I don't think anybody should be subjected to seeing that.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's 7:05, so I thought we'll just have a start, and everybody else that comes in afterwards can catch up or watch the recording for the beginning. But welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're really excited to have you here. First and foremost, I'd like to acknowledge and pay the respect of the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connection to land, sea and community. And I pay my respect to the elders, past and present, and extend the respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. Now, if you haven't heard of NALA before tonight, I'll give you a quick overview of the work that we do. So we're the National Australian Indonesia Language Awards, and we're an annual competition fostering the development of Indonesian language at all levels in Australia, from primary school all the way to executive level speakers. So we run it yearly, and this theme for this year's award is relationships, and whether that's family, friends, or professional. You can see further information about our categories, any tips and tricks, anything like that on our website at nala.org.au or on our social media, and with submission opening 1st of June. Tonight, we're really excited to hear from 3 really fantastic panelists on their career journey and how Indonesian language influenced them on their career path. But before I begin, if you feel comfortable, as I was saying, to please turn on your cameras. It would be great to see everyone throughout the evening. If you could please stay on mute when you're not speaking, that would be great. And we'll have a session, a Q&A session later on. But if you think of any questions while our panelists are speaking, feel free to put them on the chat, and we'll do our best to ask them. So I'd like to introduce our 3 speakers today. For the evening. So first we have Robbie Gaspar. Robbie was the first Australian footballer to play professionally in Indonesia, and for over 7 years he played in Indonesia for Indonesia's most prestigious football club, Persib Bandung. Robbie is fluent in Indonesian and is currently the Director for Government Corporate Community Engagement at the Australian Institute, the peak body for independent insight and engagement into Indonesian-Australian bilateral relations. Thank you so much for being here, Robbie. As a bit of a background, could you tell us a little bit more about how you got into this space and maybe what inspired you to shift your career from sports, Australian sports, to Indonesia?
Thanks for the introduction, and thanks again for having me tonight. It's an absolute honour to be here and be able to speak to you and discuss something that I'm very passionate about, or 2 things actually, Indonesia and also Indonesian language. But a little bit about I'd never been to Indonesia before I went to Indonesia, so I've never had sort of Indonesian language training before I got there. And when I got there, I decided I wanted to learn the language, and through learning the language, it made me sort of have much more enjoyable experiences while I was in Indonesia. But when I finished up playing, I sort of decided that I'd go back to university and study Indonesian, as well as sort of accounting. So I'd done a Bachelor of Business with 2 majors, with a major in accounting and Indonesian. So through also learning the language during my 8 years in Indonesia, I was lucky enough to, get a job with FIFPro So FIFA Pro Asia is the global players union for footballers. So they were looking at expanding the sort of a little bit of assistance in Indonesia and Malaysia. And because I spoke the language, I had that cultural competency as well, that language literacy as well. They asked me would I be able to do some work for them. So I was lucky enough to be able to sort of work in that space for maybe almost 6 or 7 years. And then sort of also during that time as well, I was managed to pick up a little bits and pieces of roles and how do you say it, in that Indonesian language space. So, but yeah, what I will say, you know, through learning the language, it has opened up so many more doors and opportunities, and being able to build those really good sort of relationships whilst I was in Indonesia.
Wonderful. It's great to hear about how Indonesian can, you know, intersect with so many different aspects, including sports. I think that's probably not the first thing that would come to mind for many people, but it's great to hear somebody that's experienced that. Next, we have Pa Amri Widodo. Amri has lectured in universities in the US and Australia on Indonesian languages and cultures, performing arts, media, and popular cultures. His current research is on the history and historiography of peasant and environmental movements in Indonesia. Welcome, Amri. Could you give us a little bit more detail into your professional background and what led you into the position you're working on now?
Okay. Well, for one thing, I'm not professional, so I'll give you the background. Yes, since childhood, I've been basically either trapped into this issue of language because my first language is Javanese. And if you learn Javanese, you have to learn hierarchy and how the social hierarchy is represented into language hierarchy and so on. So to me, language is interesting because it is the kind of structure, or it could function as an oppression, if you wish. Yeah. And it turned out that it's true. So I became a language teacher as I started in Sanata Dharma in Yogyakarta, in the teachers training college, where I studied linguistic language teaching and literature. And then fortunately, I got this job to teach Indonesian and Javanese language and culture at Cornell University. And for quite a few years, I spent my time in America, teaching at Cornell, at Hawaii University, Michigan, Madison, Wisconsin. Basically, one thing that I want to note here, unlike in Australia, Australia is lucky because first, it is close to Indonesia. So you can just jump into the plane or to the boat if you wish and go to Bali or Java and study the language, immerse yourself there. But America is very far. And secondly, a lot of support for studying Indonesians for Australian either youngsters or adult. And so in 1970s, there is this great Indonesian program in Salatiga and other places. Now, meanwhile, in America, it's very far. So in America, what is interesting is there is this summer program. It's called the SEASI, Southeast Asian Studies Summer Institute. And that is where Southeast Asian languages studied together, moving from one university to the other universities. And that's the only thing that they could do instead of going to Indonesia. So I was thinking when we had COVID, or even further than that before, when there was a bomb in Bali, so that security became an issue for Australians to study in Indonesia, then why not creating such a program in Australia in which there's a consortium of universities who teach Southeast Asian, in this case, Indonesian language. So basically, I've been teaching Indonesians for the past probably 40 years in different universities, and I ended up at ANU 22 years ago. Aside from teaching language, I also teach in, basically my training is in anthropology, and I teach a couple of other non-language subjects. That's it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Amri. And finally on our panel, we have Michaela Paige. Michaela completed her law and arts degree in June 2020, majoring in international relations, political economy, and social policy and she's currently working as a graduate at White & Chase LLP and is the outgoing CEO of the ASEAN Australian Strategic Youth Partnership. In 2019, Michaela spent a semester in Yogyakarta studying Indonesian business and law at the Islamic University of Indonesia. She also undertook an internship at PUSHAM, the Center for Human Rights in Yogyakarta, in 2021, and was the program coordinator for the Australian Indonesia Youth Exchange Program. Welcome, Michaela. It's so great to have you here. So how did you get into the study of Indonesian language, and what made you want to pursue a career in Australia-Indonesia relations?
Yeah, so I think, I don't know, I first started learning about Indonesia and learning Indonesian when I was on exchange. So prior to going on exchange, I, similarly to Robbie, had no language skills and hadn't really, I hadn't really engaged with Indonesia very much at all. And I ended up going to Indonesia because of the new Colombo Plan scholarship, and that kind of encouraged me to go. And then when I got there, I was like, this is actually a bit crazy, because I've been like studying international relations and law, and I have never ever learned about Indonesia or Indonesian language, despite being so close. And so that really started a bit of a passion of like, I think that more Australians need to learn Indonesian and more Australians need to become a bit more Asia literate. And that's kind of really influenced where I've taken my career since then. And so that's when I got involved with the ASEAN Australia Strategic Youth Partnership, and really, started getting involved with youth organizations. And now in my work, I work with a firm that does a lot of deals across Southeast Asia, and then also, with the Australia Indonesia Youth Exchange Program. So I think for me, my passion for Indonesian language really started because I hadn't had exposure to that, and I thought that was a bit of a letdown.
Great, thank you so much for all of your introductions. I'm going to pass to my colleague Patrick, who would be asking you guys more questions about the study of Indonesian language.
Thank you, Adi, and thank you to all of the panelists for those introductions, and looking forward to the conversation ahead. I've got a couple of sort of pre-planned questions that I'll put to you that we can have a chat about, and then sort of in 15-20 minutes I'll open it up to the floor for any further questions. But yeah, just I guess to thank you. It's great to hear the different angles and the different experiences that you bring to this conversation, and looking forward to diving a bit deeper into, I guess, the importance of language, but also how it's played a role in your careers. I guess as a starting point, and if we really do just focus in on language, I want to understand or help unpack this idea of the significance of language as a tool in all of your careers. And so, Omri, if I start with you, and I've obviously had the honor of being one of your university students, so have suspicions as where this answer might go. But you started talking about Javanese and hierarchy and the importance of language in understanding culture. I guess, to put it fairly definitively, how important, or can we participate effectively in diplomacy, effectively in business, effectively in other interactions with Indonesia and Indonesians without language?
Patrick, thank you for the exam question. Maybe the best way to start to deal with the issue of language and language learning is by looking at how we see language, right? There has been a kind of, I would say, simplifications of how language is seen that is manifested in the way how language as a subject offered in the university in particular, in which language is only seen as a means of communication. which I think it's a grave and problem in looking at language pragmatically as well as only behaviorally. Because language, the main function of the language is to constitute the world. The way you see the world is very much defined by the language that you learn in the first place. So go back to the Japanese. When you learn Japanese, you cannot see social relation as an equal interaction if you learn language, because you always see that the world is hierarchical. Just to give you an example, this is the kind of torture, but also a blessing that I experienced when I was a kid. Every word that I learn, I have to learn every concept or everything that I learn, every action that I learn, I have to have 3 words to represent it. So just the word like to eat, then it's mangan, if you know Japanese, in the low Japanese ngoko, and then dahar for the high Japanese, and nedo in the middle Japanese. So my mother trained me by asking, okay, Amre, if you are mangan, what does my father do? As if we are doing different thing. So, and then I have to say dahar. If I don't answer correctly, then either my mother not really slap me, but scorn me because I don't use the correct word. So in this case, then, aside from looking at language as the instrument by which you can see the world, and also language as a weapon. And this is related to my research on the peasant communities in Blora and Central Java, in which they use language as a way of fighting against or avoiding the colonial state obligation by speaking or by having a set of vocabulary that is given a different kind of meaning. If you have a new meaning to a set of language, it means, and it has been lasting for 1 century, then it means that there must be an ideology. There must be some kind of belief which underlie such a kind of language practice. Just the last note, language as a weapon. Language is also something that can be dangerous, because speaking is not cheap, like when you have long distance relationship, but speaking is also dangerous. Quite a number of Indonesian students or activists were jailed. Okay, Nuku Sulaiman was jailed for I think 5.5 years because he carried a banner in front of the parliament saying SDSB, with it is sumbangan dana sosial berhadiah, which is kind of lottery. But then he wrote into SBY datang semua bubar. Soeharto datang semua bubar. Yeah, something like that. So he got 5.5 years. My own brother got 2.5 years because he played this pun in this kind of public event. So speaking language is important, speaking is dangerous, and you see the world through your language.
Thank you, Amri. And I wonder if I can pick up on a point that you're speaking about there and maybe turn it to you, Robbie. Amri sort of picks up on the idea that language is not just a tool of communication, but I'm interested in hearing from you about your experience. You said in your introduction that you sort of picked up Indonesian after first going there. I wondered, did you pick it up as a tool for communication? Did it become something else? What was your experience with language?
Cheers, Patrick. I like what Pa Amity said, is the way you see the world, the way you see the world through language. And I got to see Indonesia, for example, in a different light because I spoke the language, compared to other people that probably didn't see the language. So that's a really good point. I never actually thought of that, what Parmdi said. So through that learning of the language, it sort of, made me see Indonesia in a different light, and also, become that passionate Indonesianist. I don't know if you can use that word, Indonesianist, but, sort of passionate Indonesianist, because I could speak the language and I got to see it in a different light compared to some other people that, for example, didn't learn the language when they were in Indonesia.
Yeah, awesome. And if I can draw you on a similar question, Michaela, in your work as a lawyer, looking, I guess, more broadly at the Southeast Asian region and cases there, as well as deals, what sort of insight do you get, or how do you see language or your understanding of the Indonesian language as playing a role in your sort of day-to-day work life?
I really agree with what Pak Amri said, in that I think it gives you a window or a perspective to kind of look at things differently. And I think looking at language as something to be almost like transactionally beneficial, and that you learn a language, you can speak to someone, it kind of misses out this whole below the iceberg kind of context that you get when you speak the language. And I think some of the ways that that's helped me in my professional life has been like actually understanding a lot of the social norms or the social expectations, I guess, that come with interacting with someone from Indonesia, but also more broadly, a lot of countries across Southeast Asia, that I don't think I would understand as deeply or as fully if I hadn't spoken the language. So like a good example is, if you learn the language, you'll learn, an example would be, you would learn like the time, right? You would learn how to say 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. But when you start to speak that language and interact with people, my experience has always been that people in Indonesia very rarely say, come to my house at 1 o'clock. It's like, come to my house at siang or sore. And there's a whole context behind that comes with my experience of Indonesian culture that I don't think I would understand if I didn't have those insights that I think I've gotten through learning the language. Also things like the way you address people, or this kind of hierarchical cultural kind of expectations that Pak Amri was talking about. I don't know that I would have picked up on a lot of that or been able to interact as effectively in my professional life if I hadn't had this lens through which to look at that. And I think that lens, a good starting point is language. Fantastic,
thank you. And maybe I'll go back to you again, Michaela, and draw you on another question. I guess we hear about declining Indonesian studies and declining uptake of language, and not to put you on the spot, but what do you think are some of the strategies or the ideas on how we can tackle declining Indonesian studies?
Yeah, I think there's a few. It's a big question, but I think to kind of put it down to a few different things to talk about. One, I think it's kind of a chicken and the egg for me. I think when we look at the way, for me in Australia growing up, not having really had parents or family that have had a lot to do with Asia or Indonesia, my experience or my kind of understanding of Indonesia up until I went there and up until I started looking and really interacting with people from Indonesia was what you get in the news. And the news, for me at least, was Bali bombings, drug smuggling, live cattle exports. It wasn't positive, right? And so I think there needs to be broader education about Indonesia as a neighbor and what Indonesia as a country is like, more than those like clickbaity kind of headline topics. Because I think until people really start to understand what Indonesia is about, I don't think there's necessarily going to be the interest driving it, because who wants to kind of learn a language when they haven't really had any exposure to it? You haven't grown up knowing how important it is as a neighbor. All the things you hear in the news are things that are not necessarily positive. And I think that's a huge kind of chicken and the egg kind of starting point for us to look at how do we kind of educate people better to be more Asia literate and to be more Asia aware as a starting point. And then two, I think there's funding, there's all sorts of things that come into the more political side of that. But I do think that there's a big role to play for young people, particularly in learning the language, but also just becoming more aware of our closest neighbor.
Yeah, Robbie, I see an eagerness to jump in on this conversation. So I'll go to you. I guess same question.
Oh, great question. It is a great question. It's probably something we probably could use the whole seminar talking about, but but you know, in fairness, we have so many sort of great people trying to tackle this issue. And I don't think it's just Indonesian that as a language that is in decline. I think it's all languages. So I think, you know, maybe we need to make learning a priority and maybe compulsory. I don't know, you know, like one thing that I was blown away by when I was in Europe and traveling, and that, you know, there's some of the people that speak 2, 3, 4 languages quite fluently. And, you know, we're only sort of speaking one here. And I think, you know, as, you know, like what Amni said before, you know, we can see the world in a different way by learning languages. So, and I think it's, you know, like, but also probably, you know, like maybe we need some more government support and private enterprise that come together and work together and, you know, support for students that do learn the language. You know, we provide them with a job later on when they come out, or, you know, work experience at the end of university or high school once you've completed your studies, because I think parents also see this. And I sort of feel, you know, like they have a lot of influence on what subjects that children select at university or high school. And, you know, if there's no jobs at the end of it, or there's not very many jobs at the end of it, you know, do they sort of, you know, see that light at the end of the tunnel once they do sort of, you know, like Katia said, complete their language studies. I was studying at Murdoch and I finished in, you know, my component of my degree back in 2018. And there was only 5 of us at the end of the 3 years. And yeah, I'm sort of still I'm the only one that's sort of working in that Indonesia space. So I think, you know, we all need to probably come together and find out ways where we can sort of, you know, get people that are learning the language engaged and, you know, like actually working in that space. I think it's really important having that language literacy, and when you're sort of, you know, trying to build relationships with our nearest neighbor, Indonesia.
Yeah, and I think you touch on an interesting point there, Robbie, which is really about the pathways. Like, if people are learning languages, how are they using it, and where does that take them? And is that an important consideration at the outset? Or, you know, obviously we wouldn't want to discourage people from learning language because there wasn't a pathway, but is showing the pathway as a way of encouraging people to learn languages. And I guess, you know, to some degree, that's what this is about, in terms of seeing people who have Indonesian language skills, are using them in their careers, and sort of showcasing to others what that might look like. Amri, I know you're going to probably jump in and answer the tackling the decline in Indonesian studies question anyway. But if I can put the question to you first, I suspect you've taught thousands of people Indonesian language. What sort of sense do you have of how people end up using it, or what careers people typically pursue with their Indonesian language skills? I think you're just on mute.
Okay. Well, do you want to start with you, Patrick? What year were you at ANU?
Graduated 2016.
2016. Okay, that's already post Bali bombing, yeah. Yeah. Look, this is the thing. Not only me, but all the Indonesian teachers, both at the high school, elementary school, and university, have been fighting a losing war, basically. And the reason why it's so is because the problem is structural. When you have a structural problem, you have to attack it with structural action. But nonetheless, it is not, because the structural action should be done politically by the government. And what I'm saying here is that what has been devastating for the Indonesian program at the university level, as well as at the high school level, is after the Bali bombing, and later on the bombing in the hotel in Jakarta, is the security, basically, security issue, where students are not allowed to go to Indonesia to learn language through immersion. Now, as you remember, all the universities in Australia have declining students, and within 20 years, it has gone less than half the remaining students. Not only students, but also the faculty members or the teachers, as well as the program for Indonesian studies and Indonesian language courses. So, and it has not picked up. Sometimes now, I think it has even out and more or less stable, but it cannot go back to the heyday, which ended up after the Bali bombing. So what I'm saying here is that we need to create a different kind of strategy. The Indonesian teachers have been mourning, have been complaining, has been basically kicking for the last 20 years in vain. So maybe you have to see it in a different way. And that is, first, I think I get a sense with the several programs that has been created by the Indonesian government, a realization that the Indonesian program in Australia could not be what it was in the past, where it was mostly supported by Australian government with different kind of program, which is part of the development of Asian languages. As you know, there are 4 Asian languages that was developed. Let's compare it with Korean language. Korean language has been mushrooming, but not only because of what the Korean Australian government has done, but particularly with the popularity of K-pop, basically. So it is outside of the government program. Now, maybe we need to think about something which make Indonesian language more attractive. When I came in 1998, there are two kind of students who study Indonesian language. There's simplification. One is the students who just totally crazy about Indonesia and about Indonesian language. They would do anything. They would go to Indonesia. They would just go crazy, right? And so they learn. Secondly, they learn Indonesian language as a way of getting a job, because there is a job available, not only academic, business is not yet that, but mostly government, civil servant or teachers and so on. The jobs are available. So there is a concrete practical stimulus for studying Indonesian. But after about 10 years later, that kind of correlation between Indonesian language learning and job market is basically gone. So now we need to probably revamp the positions as Indonesia as first the destination for tourism, but maybe as something with IASEPA, maybe Indonesia could be perceived as something different in which studying Indonesian language becomes a kind of a requirement as well as an enjoyment. I want to add one note here about language learning, that learning a new language or other language is not only learning about the skill, it's not only behavior, but also a couple of things. One, the ability and the willingness to transform subjectivity and identity. You have to allow yourself to cross the road and to be the other, the Indonesian speaker, and also borrow or pick up some kind of identity as an Indonesian speaker. And when you get to that point, then learning new language or speaking to language is moving between two changing worlds. Now, by seeing that Australia is changing, Indonesia is changing, then we can see that learning Indonesian language is a different business. And at the same time also, is the business that should be carried out by the two countries as well as the two people.
Thank you, Pak Amri. And I think that answer and this discussion is really useful in setting the scene. And I know we're, in a room of people who believe in the importance of language, but even just rehearing or thinking about what those main arguments are for learning language, what, you know, to go back to your first comment, Pa Umri, that we do need to think about it as more than just a tool of communication and all of the benefits that brings, but also, I guess, the study of language. And to go to Michaela's point around how sort of digging below the surface, or I think under the water where the iceberg is, helps in so many different aspects as well. So it's, I guess, taking a very narrow subject of language and really expanding its importance and its usefulness, and bringing that into the conversation. I've got one more question that I'll ask Robbie and Michaela, and then I will open it up to the group, because I think with that foundation, it would be great to really focus or get your questions on careers and the importance of language in sort of finding a job or working in an area that you're interested in. And so looking forward to that. Before we do that, Robbie and Michaela, I know you have both been involved at different stages in ACHICHIS, the Australian Consortium for In-Country Indonesian Studies, and IAP, which is the Australia-Indonesia Youth Exchange Program. I might go to you first, Michaela. What kind of roles do you think these programs play in advocating and strengthening Australia-Indonesia relationships, but also, I guess, in forming those friendships and those networks that sort of help in your career development or as you progress on that pathway?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. I think in terms of the Indonesia-Australia relationship, I think these programs like IAP, like ACHICHIS, like NCP to some extent, I think they form these friendships and these relationships where young people at the beginning of their career, or not even just young people at the beginning of their career, people who are interested in the space, who are kind of maybe starting out in the space, can really get a sense for and an understanding on a deeper level of Indonesia. And I think that's really important because as you kind of go through your career, I think we're all more comfortable as humans interacting with people that we know, or people that we are comfortable interacting with, or cultures that we're comfortable interacting with. And a great example is like a lot of people feel really comfortable about going to America, for example, because we've grown up watching American movies, we kind of know what the culture's like, we know the language. And I think these programs can really create that sort of understanding in a way that we don't often get exposed to in terms of Indonesia. And I think that's really, we're seeing the results of that now, in that when I look at IAP, the Australia-Indonesia Youth Exchange Program, when I think of people at the forefront of the Australia-Indonesia relationship, at least in my world, most, if not all of them, have had some interaction or some touch point with IAP or ACHICHIS. And I think that really speaks to the importance of a lot of these programs in creating people who are going to be leading these relationships that then have a really strong grounding in the cultural understanding and in language and in cultural literacy. So I think that kind of really goes to the first part of that question, which is what are the roles of those programs? And I don't know, Robbie, if you want to weigh in on that as well.
Yeah, definitely, like that role of that program. So I worked in Indonesia playing football for 8 years. I came back, I started studying, and I saw ACHICHIS as an opportunity to go back and sort of get out of my comfort zone and do something different. And so I was lucky enough to do the business professional practicum, and then 2 weeks intensive language and 4 weeks at the Australian Embassy. And I ended up sort of working on sports diplomacy, which I'm sort of doing a lot of stuff in now. So it really opened up my eyes to a new area that I didn't really sort of know too much about, and sort of develop new relationships, new contacts. You also, how do you say it? You're there for that short period of time. You learn the language. It's intense. And it's always an opportunity to dip your toe in that water in something you're passionate about, in an industry you're passionate about as well. and sort of, do I really want to go down this path? And for me, it was, yep, definitely. And so I sort of came back and just with a, sense of, like more motivation. And ever since then, I've been sort of really sort of focused on that sports diplomacy space. I was just got to, thank the Chichis for that program, for offering me the opportunity to go up there and do it. And, pre-COVID, the numbers are growing is unbelievable. And so the job that Liam and everybody's doing at Chichis, it's fantastic. And I never got the opportunity to do AEP, but I heard a lot of really good things about it. So, but if you get the opportunity to do a Chichis, please go and do it. It's fantastic, even if it's only for 6 weeks of the, one of the programs. But if you can do the full 6 months, I think it's fantastic. And it looks good on your CV as well. Gives you that point of difference, I feel, if you're looking for a job later on down the track. So,
actually, that just reminded me as well. I think to kind of build on that, I feel like I built a really big professional network on a Chichis program where my experience has been that the Australia-Indonesia space, it's not small, but once you know a few people, everyone's separated by 2 degrees of separation. So, or even 1 degree of separation. So going on these programs and doing Indonesian language courses and getting involved in the space, I feel like your professional network can just explode because you meet 1 or 2 people and then they know someone else and everyone suddenly becomes your 1 degree of separation contact. And that, I think for me, was something that I took away as well, was just that growing of that professional network in a really targeted space.
Can I tell you as well, Patrick, and when you're on these programs, make sure you go out, network, meet people, because, ask people to go for a coffee, ask questions. Don't be afraid, because a lot of people want to help out and want to see people, like getting to, sort of into that Indonesia space and be there for you as well. So my coach always used to say, don't meet anybody staying at home. So if you can get out and sort of meet people and, network while you're there, it's even better.
Yeah, fantastic. We might go to questions from the audience. Matthew, Hasim, if you'd like to ask your question in person, just turn on your camera and your microphone, or just shoot a message and I can summarize and put it to the panel.
Yeah, hi everyone. Sorry, the lighting is not
Thanks,
that good. Yeah, so my question was just exactly as what I put in the chat. So I'm from New South Wales, and yeah, firstly, a lot of the issues regarding the decline, it seems to be very structural, almost at the political level. But on the local level, I just wanted to know what your thoughts on how and what organizations can do, like organizations like us can do, in order to boost the study or boost the profile of Indonesian language at all levels of education. And yeah, I think that question was just open to everyone.
Thanks, Matthew. Who would like to jump in on that?
Okay, I have a little bit of thing I say. To answer that question, probably we need to situate it into our state of our condition right now, not only in terms of Indonesian language studies, but how at least regionally in the Asia Pacific region, who are we and where we are going to go. I mean, look at what happened in the last probably 30 to 50 years. There is a very massive economic development, right? And so countries like Indonesia, Thailand, and others have been economically growing. And there is a social consequences on this economic development. For instance, massive urbanization. Second, the rise of the middle class, the expansion of middle classes in the emerging economies. And the implication of that is that suddenly people in Indonesia and Thailand and so on have a buying capacity, no different from the country like advanced economy like Australia. What happened in the advanced economies, there is an income stagnation of lower middle and lower classes. Okay, so the buying capacity of the middle class in the emerging economy could be either the same or even higher. Okay, and if, at the same time, there is a rise of the global elite in these countries who speak more than one languages. Now, the implication of this is that suddenly we have a growing number of middle class, and particularly the youngsters, the youth, who share interest, aspiration, lifestyle, as well as social mobility. Now, sometimes when we see Indonesia-Australia relationship, we still see it as if Indonesia is a backward country who still don't have a toilet paper, for instance. Or the Indonesian only rely on cultural richness. So we need to change our perspective in looking at first, who are the main agents of this changing world in Asia-Pacific regions, and they are the youngsters, the youth, you, all of you. I'm old, I'm your grandpa. So the implication of this is that the fact that you have aspiration, lifestyle, no different from people in Jakarta, in Bangkok, and others, it is easier actually for you to communicate to each other, regardless of the language that you use. And you are interested in learning from each other, as well as you do not put one country in a better style as the model of the others, but instead you are equal. And this is a huge capital to develop. So going back to your question, Matthew, about what we can do, a little organization, a small organization could contribute a lot, especially with the help of the social media, the media, where you can communicate, as well as your purchasing power for mobility around the region. Now, so in this case, maybe just one thing that I need to say about Indonesian language learning here is that you can help each other immersing yourself in creating a new kind of culture. The fusion culture. Fusion is Australian famous term for food, right? So and now Indonesia or this is the thing about cultural exchange, which is part of language exchange. Strategy, which I think is outdated, is by importing or presenting or performing the cultural heavy performances in which the audience become wow, right? But the wow is not enough, because after you say wow, you go home and you forget. Instead, what we need to promote is intercultural communication, either through job, through art, through other means or an aspect or units of life in which youngsters are interested and easily engaged. Sport, for instance, sport diplomacy. That is something that's really open. Yeah. Now, so in this case, yeah, John, one last
point.
Yeah, and that is now I forgot what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that now there is no concern. We don't need to be too concerned about the bastardization of culture. Fusion, hybrid is good. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Amri. And I think just to draw attention to Rebecca's comment as well around the need for resources and promoting modern Indonesia, not, I guess, just traditional or historical Indonesia in the classroom as well. Robbie, you were eager to jump in. Pak Amri's thrown you a hospital pass in sports diplomacy. What's the role of a youth organisation, a NILA or an IA, in supporting uptake in Indonesian language studies?
I think you just need to continue what you guys are currently doing, just continually advocating, for, people to learn the language, and what you're doing is fantastic, like hosting these types of seminars, like organising events and so on, and just all of us sort of still sticking together and just working together to try and encourage, you know, more people to take up the learning of the Indonesian language. You know, yeah, and what was I going to say? And just trying to be creative and just sort of, can we, you know, maybe brainstorm some ideas and, you know, like, is it through sport? Is it art? Through culture? I know, like, sort of, Harmony talked about K-pop, you know, but I think once people learn about the Indonesian culture, they realize, you know, there's a massive punk, you know, like, sort of, you know, scene there, rock, you know, like, and music's massive there as well, food culture, coffee culture. And I think once you immerse yourself in a culture, you sort of, you know, I learned how sort of, I loved it, you know, like Indonesia and the culture there and everything about it. And sort of, I'd never been there before. And sort of, you know, once you sort of immerse yourself there and you see how good it is. And I think if we're there advocating, you know, the sort of, you know, like, about Indonesia, I think, you know, more people will start to look, you know, at sort of maybe studying the language and sort of, you know, like interacting and sort of engaging with Indonesia a lot more. So.
Yeah, fantastic. And Michaela, yeah, to jump to you, and I guess to also get your insight. I know sort of your involvement with the ASEAN Australia Strategic Youth Partnership and other youth organisations. Yeah, what is the role of youth organisations? I guess to bring it back to sort of networking and supporting career development, but also in tackling declining Indonesian studies.
Yeah, I think it's twofold. I think first, well, actually, I think it's manyfold, but to focus on two. I think the first one that I think ASIP, so the ASEAN Australia Strategic Youth Partnership, we really focus on is this idea of bringing relationships back into diplomacy. So, you know, if like, and I'm a really strong believer that if you know someone from Indonesia, if you have one friend that you've spoken about Indonesia to, already you've made a difference. Because if more people had one friend who is Indonesian, or people in Indonesia having one friend who's in Australia, it just opens up this channel of communication where you can actually become more comfortable with that culture, more comfortable with the language, and then you can feel more comfortable going forward in your career, bringing that into your world. And I think that has a really, really large part to play in terms of bringing the Australia-Indonesia relationship more broadly closer, but also in encouraging people to learn the language. I think it brings it onto people's radar. So stuff that AYA does, stuff that ASIP does, building those relationships among people, I think is not to be underestimated. Like, youth organizations have, perhaps in my mind, the biggest role to play, because we're connecting young people, right? And that is really most effectively, I believe, done by other young people. And so that's a really, really important role. I think the other role that I think youth organizations play is really advocating for young people to have a voice, and to be inserted into these spaces that we're often left out of. And so I think when you kind of feel as though you can have a say and you can have input into something, it's really motivating. If you're suddenly with AYA and you're like, hey, like, actually, I can have an influence in this one thing that I'm really passionate about, or I can meet other people who are really passionate about this one thing that I'm interested in, already there's a community of people around you who are going to motivate you to be able to have your voice heard in that space, and to be a part of what's going on and being a part of the issues that are happening, or the current affairs. And I think that's also really important, is surrounding yourself with your people who can kind of help you create space to be involved. So I think they're the really, really important parts of youth organizations in this whole conversation. But in terms of youth organizations in career development, I think it has to do with networking, a lot of it, other than making relationships, but a byproduct of that is networking, right? If you're getting to know other young people who are really passionate about Indonesia, as you will go forward in your careers, whether it's you become like sports people or scientists or lecturers or diplomats or whatever, if you think 10 to 15 years down the track, those people that you did that Achichis program with, those people that you volunteered with AYA with, those people that you volunteered with ASIP with, those people that you studied Indonesian with at university, like, they're all going to have this level of interest and passion that you also share. So going forward, it creates these connections in your professional world that I think you can always draw on, which I think is really powerful as well. And for me, like, I've experienced that. Some of my closest mentors are people that I've met through youth organizations and through work that I've done that has spiraled off from people that I've met through youth organizations. And so I think it has a really important role to play. And I think it really highlights the power of young people and the importance of young people being included.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michaela. I know there are other questions there, and Tariq had said that I'd come to you on your question to Pak Amri on Javanese hierarchy. We are approaching the end of the session, so I might get you to provide that question offline and we'll get an answer to it. I do apologize. I do just want to wrap up quickly by thanking all of our panelists for the discussion this evening. It's obviously a discussion that's close to my heart and to all of our hearts, but I think talking about the breadth and significance of language in so many different areas, we've touched on, I think, the sort of very practical ideas around getting involved in youth organizations and programs, networking, and how that can feed back into career development. But I think perhaps to my mind, the more exciting part is thinking about how language changes ways of thinking and ways of operating, and how really that's a skill that doesn't require a job with Indonesian language requirements, but sets you up, I think, as an ideal employee, Pak Amri. So 1 minute to go, which will really put the clock on, but I do, I guess, want to throw back to the panelists for one quick 10-second grab on what your best advice is for people in this conversation, for aspiring diplomats, aspiring business people, academics, teachers. What's your best advice to people in this space? Pak Amri, you will lead the charge.
Okay. I think just one thing that I want to acknowledge, as well as to be grateful for the jasa of teachers. And I see here Rebecca Pataglini, who was also my student at the NU, but has been one of the model of teacher who developed Indonesian program in a number of school where he was posted. This is from students who come to ANU. The reason why they keep studying Indonesian, even though there is a lot of restriction, is because of the teacher. The teacher is interesting, opening up their eyes, as well as developing love to Indonesia. So thank you for the teacher. And secondly, youth, this is your era. You're the one who will decide where Indonesian language studies will go. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Amri. Michaela.
A quick 10 seconds. I think advice would be having Indonesian language skills and Indonesian cultural competency makes you a much more interesting person, and that goes a long way in your career. And so having that is actually a point of interest. And the second thing is, people who are involved in the Indonesia space generally, in my experience, love to talk about Indonesia. So please don't feel afraid to put yourself out there and reach out and expand those networks, because everyone's really happy to have a chat for a really long time. So don't be shy.
Thank you, Michaela. Robbie.
I agree with everything that Michaela and Amri have said, and I'll just say, tetap bekerja keras, tetap positive, stay positive, work hard, just network, and just never lose sight of, if you sort of really want something, like you'll get there, and just sort of, and don't be afraid to ask for advice, and because there's always people willing to help out. So thanks again for the opportunity to come on this evening. It's been fantastic. You guys are doing an amazing job.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for attending, for being part of the conversation. I think that will be it, unless Sophie or Adi tell me otherwise. We're all good. Thank you very much. Thank you again to our panelists, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Patrick and Aline, for organizing the seminar.
Terima kasih, Pak Amri.
And thank you, Michaela and Robbie, for connecting with me through LinkedIn.
It's lovely to meet you all.
Thank you. Selamat malam.
Selamat malam, Maria.
Malam.